there. How we doing today? Vince's big smile. We're both freshly shaven today. It's amazing. I know. Do you shave, Vince? Vince, of course, for our YouTube live stream people, we'll just amuse ourselves, I guess, for a second. When you shave, which is not very often,
No.
do you have electric, or do you do like full
no.
lathered up and all that kind of stuff?
Electric does not cut through the Italian thickness of my beard. It does. I mean, maybe the newer ones, but like I started with an electric back in the day, and it doesn't. It would rub me raw. It's not even worth it. And so yeah, I've been a straight edge forever.
Do you go shower or sink when you shave?
Sink.
Okay.
Sink.
I'm a shower guy. I've been a shower guy for a long time. Yeah.
No kidding. But I have to shower first. I always shower first, and then I get out.
I have to have like a mirror in there with me and all that kind of stuff. But you really get, like the steam and the hot.
Yes.
Helps out quite a bit.
Now that
sometime.
I agree with that, because that's why I have to shower first, and then I do it like immediately when I get out. I don't know if I'm talented enough to do it in the shower. Like, I don't know. I feel like that takes a lot of talent that only Sean Stires has.
I don't know about that. Well, thanks for joining us today as we conclude shaving talk tips for the start of today. Rumor has it there are a lot of bigger topics going on right now after USC and UCLA and the Big Ten just swallowed up the entire sports landscape for the most part. You'll have to bear with me. I think I'm doing okay so far. I had a dentist appointment this afternoon. My tongue is okay. This side of my face, the right side of my face, and my lip feel, like they're out to the doorway right now. But I think I'm doing okay.
It doesn't look that way. I'll give you that. It does not look that way at all. So I think you're good.
Glad to have you with us today, whether it's YouTube, one of the myriad of podcast outlets. As always, a simple request: throw us a like, subscribe, follow, rate, comment, all of that stuff. It goes a long way toward helping out the Irish Breakdown channels and gets the word out there to to people all about the show. Little 4th of July weekend. Hope everybody did all right. We ventured out by Lake Michigan, beach and some breweries and all that different kind of stuff. We saw the Elvis movie this weekend. Spoiler alert, he dies at the end. So I don't know if you knew that or not, but
that's like going into Titanic and wondering what happens at the end.
That's right.
Yeah.
You haven't seen it yet, I take it?
I have not. That's one of the things circled on like a date night in the future. So
wasn't bad. I went into it a little bit skeptical, but it was interesting. I like the way they kind of kept it moving, and they even kind of weaved some like modern hip-hop type stuff in there a couple of different times, which I thought was a little interesting choice, but at the same time it's like, okay, I see what you're doing there.
Okay.
But also saw the season 4 finale of Stranger Things this weekend. Do you watch Stranger Things?
My kids do, but I don't.
It's weird how it's kind of the demographic, I guess, seems to skew young, but we started watching it, and it's like set in the 80s, fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana, which is supposed to be outside Indianapolis, and a lot of fun 80s references and throwbacks, for someone like me, because I was in high school in the 80s. And, like, in fact, even like this season, they had like this bad jock guy, a new character they introduced, had a letter jacket with his class of 86 patch on the sleeve. That was my class, 86. So took me right back,
Nice.
Yeah. But a lot of really bad hairstyles by some of the male characters on there. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah. Speaking of letter jackets, holy crap, are they expensive?
Oh, that's right. You've got to do that now with your son, don't you?
Just did it, and I feel like I had to bust out a second mortgage to just bring that sucker home. Like, oh my goodness gracious. This is the first time I've ever really been upset about the fact that my name is like 7 letters long in the back, because they charge you by the letter on the back.
That's true.
Nutty, man, how expensive that thing was.
We had like all the add-ons. It's like, I had the, like the class patch.
Right.
And then I had my last name on the back, and of course the letter. And then, if you won anything, you could get the extra patches and all that.
We had to get a couple patches made, and then you got to get them attached. So, I mean, he's got 4 patches on the back, and then the year and the letter and the I was like, holy crap, dude.
That's true.
I had no idea how expensive that was going to be.
There's a lot to it. There's a lot to it.
Man.
Sure. Well, I won't give away or spoil anything from Stranger Things. I've seen a couple comments in the chat already. It's it's a good show, fun. There was a really good scene in the finale. And again, I'm not giving anything away with this, but a really good scene in the finale. This new character this season, Eddie, he's kind of the outcast heavy metal guy. He gets up, he pulls out his electric guitar, and he plays this Metallica song. And if you're on, like you see it's, like Metallica is trending right now. I'm not even going to say the name of the song. That's how little I'm going to spoil by this. But again, I'm not going to tell you any more about it so I don't ruin it. But it was just a cool scene. I thought. I'm starting to feel my lip a little bit. But the reason he did it was just really useful, and I'll leave it at that. But it got me thinking when I saw that scene this weekend. Again, you didn't watch Stranger Things, but
right.
I don't know about you when you were in high school in the 90s. I was in high school in the 80s. You were the 90s. The show's set in the 80s. When I was in high school in the 80s, the heavy metal kids were not what you'd call like running with the in crowd, and I'm not disparaging by any means, but it's like they were their own crowd, basically, the heavy metal guys, with the hair and the t-shirts, Metallica, Megadeth t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. And, they just kind of hung out with each other, basically, but, they even had like like in the 80s, when I was in high school, they actually had a place outside that, like the metal guys could go and smoke their cigarettes out there.
Wow.
But, so that tells you what, how different times were back then, but they were the metal guys and they just kind of did their own thing. And the thing with metal guys, though, like as you get older now, if you kind of look back, sometimes one of them grows up to be Dave Grohl, like
fair.
Arguably the most powerful rock musician in the world right now, seemingly irrelevant, just kind of meh 1 minute. And the next thing boom, Dave Grohl, Eddie Vedder, Axl Rose, take your pick, whoever it happens to be, they stand in the corner, smoke their cigarettes 1 minute. The next thing they're the ones calling all the shots. And I say that because that's kind of the Big Ten right now. Because
look at that segue.
Remember a couple of years ago, the pandemic is raging. Kevin Warren just became Big Ten commissioner, and he's got a big decision to make. Are they going to play? Everyone had a decision to make. Are they going to play college football? They shut this season down. Big decision for a first-time commissioner. And he comes in. He's the first major conference to go, we're not going to play this year. And it leaves everyone else kind of in the lurch. And then here comes Notre Dame to save college football. And, remember, even ESPN said Notre Dame saved college football. Remember that? I think it was Ivan Maisel did that piece about how Notre Dame saved college football. But the unthinkable happened. Notre Dame joins a conference. And then Kevin Warren and the Big Ten end up pivoting. They decide they're going to play after all. It's a partial season, but Ohio State ends up making the college football playoff.
Right.
But that was just 2 years ago. Big Ten was a kind of a laughing stock with all of that stuff going on. They were the first ones to shut it down. Then here we are, not even 2 calendar years later. They're one of the 2 most powerful college football conferences in the country. Conferences, period. And it's all because of this big, fat, lucrative TV contract that they're about to sign. And, they're going to sign a TV deal that's going to pay them over $1 billion a year. First conference to ever have a TV contract that big. And to celebrate, what do? Hey, UCLA, USC, why don't you come on over here? We're a Midwestern conference. We don't mind, though, reaching out to Los Angeles. So they get those 2 big boys, and now the Pac-12 is teetering on the brink of extinction. So they go from being a garage band a couple of years ago to now it's stadium tours for the Big Ten with all this money that they're raking in. And, everyone else is left out there to figure out how they're going to stay alive. And, that includes Notre Dame as well. And that is obviously our topic today, with all of this still kind of looming. We did the Twitter poll. We'll get to that here in a minute. But where does Notre Dame go from here? Can they stay independent? Do they join the Big Ten? Do they jump with both feet into the ACC, as they are technically currently contractually obligated to do? Or do they, go outside the box maybe and do something else? Man, the more I talk, the more the front of my face becomes numb. It's like the blood is circulating now. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kaiser, my dentist this afternoon. I'll just kind of take a pause from there and get some thoughts from you first, Vince, on what you think about everything right now before I get into this highly scientific Twitter poll that we did this afternoon.
Very scientific. And yes. I did vote in the Twitter poll, so I'm excited to see what the results actually were. The results were interesting when I voted, but that was a while back. So I'm curious to see, where things are. But, I have to say we were in the middle of doing a show when the news broke that USC and UCLA were going to come over to the Big Ten, or the speculation, that kind of thing. And I was like, come on, give me a break. That's Twitter bunk. Like that. There's no way that that's actually happening. I was shocked, frankly. And now, a couple days removed from that, you kind of take a step back and you're like, well, should anything really shock you at this point based on, Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC and now, but I think UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten is an even bigger shock to me, just based on geography. I mean, it's not a fit. It's not a fit geographically for them to come to the Big Ten.
And that's, a lot of things.
But that doesn't matter anymore.
I listened and read, some national stuff, whether it was podcasts or, different things at the end of last week, right after all this happened, and all these, national guys, they kept wanting to talk about, the volleyball team and the basketball teams and I get it. It's going to be a travel nightmare, but guess what? And look, I do women's basketball. I love college baseball. I love, women's, but all this different stuff. They're just an afterthought. Football obviously drives the bus. It's a cliche, but it's completely true. Nobody cares about the logistics and all the hoops that all these smaller, Olympic sports have to jump through, because it is all about football. Because even, on the men's side, March Madness is taking a back seat in all this. Like my alma mater, Kansas, great basketball school, but obviously sucks at football. And, they could get left by the wayside depending on what happens with the Big 12. I mean, they could end up in the equivalent of the Mountain West, or, they might even end up in the Mountain West for all I know. But, it's like, it's just the way of the world. The money, the disparity in the money is just completely different when you're talking about football.
It is
any other sport. And, like
they don't care about
the silver lining, for USC and UCLA and anyone who has to travel out there is the fact that, well, you've got more money to cover all that travel now. It might stink. There's going to be some logistics they have to work out. How about USC and UCLA baseball and softball?
Exactly.
Come to this part of the country, in March and April. They're going to love that.
They're going to hate it.
Nobody cares about that.
Right. And I'm pretty sure they both have beach volleyball teams. I'm not sure how that's going to go over in the Big Ten. You know what I mean? And like Oregon wants to join the Big Ten. Well, what's Oregon the best at? Track, right? Yeah. That's their thing, is track. You're going to come to run track at Wisconsin or Minnesota or any of these northern schools. You're going to come to there to run track in the spring. Like it's just that can't be good for the track program at Oregon. You know what I mean? Like, but they don't care about those. Those aren't money-making sports. And so those are all taking a back seat. They don't care about those. They're not going to be successful in those sports anymore based on, if I'm picking a baseball school and I'm a top flight athlete in baseball, I'm a top prospect, UCLA and USC just dropped on my list because I don't want to go play at Minnesota and Purdue and all these other places in March and April. I don't want to do that. I'm going to the SEC, where the majority of my games are going to be south of the Mason-Dixon line, or I'll go to the ACC, where still the majority of the games are south of the Mason-Dixon line, except for Notre Dame, we get to go every other year. But I'm not going to USC or UCLA. I just think this is really going to negatively impact the rest of their sports. But the bottom line is they don't care. They don't care. They want that $100 million payday that they're projected to get from the football money.
Well, look, and, we'll talk about the dominant topic today is what's going to happen with Notre Dame, obviously. But as we have time toward the end, or maybe this even happens tomorrow, just depending on how long we talk about the rest of this stuff, I'll just say this, having both Los Angeles teams yanked out of, basically yanked to the Big Ten, the rest of the Pac-12 is losing the Los Angeles market.
Absolutely.
And,
that's huge.
Like So like that is going to kill, like those other schools. Not that UCLA or USC have to be worried about it, but in terms of impact on the rest of the Pac-12, the recruiting impact on that, now you're not even going to be televised in Los Angeles,
right?
Unless it's a national game and you happen to be playing, one of those schools in a nationally televised game. The rest of that conference is not good, and even San Diego for that matter as well, probably. But you're not going to be, in the Los Angeles market 2, and you're not going to be on it anymore. That's a huge impact on recruiting, especially when you're trying to go down and get those LA kids to go to Oregon or Washington or wherever it happens to be.
Yeah, no question. Completely agree with that. That's the Pac-12's in trouble.
The
Pac-12's in big trouble. And now I just saw a report that a handful of the Pac-12 teams are being courted by the Big 12.
Yes.
And so, what is going to happen there? That's another question that's going to have to be answered here real soon.
All right. So we did this highly scientific Twitter poll today. What do you think Notre Dame should do is basically the question. The options: stay independent, join the Big Ten, join the ACC full-time, form a new alliance. Before I give the results, I guess I could have said join the SEC. I mean, do you think that option is more viable than any of those other 4 options I get? Again, I guess it's out there. I just don't see that being a true fit for Notre Dame, unless, the money was just so much greater than anything else.
I guess my biggest,
the national footprint of the Big Ten, for example, now.
I guess my biggest argument to that would be, I don't think fit matters anymore. If there's going to be 2 conferences, I don't think fit matters, to be honest with you.
I see what you're saying, but in terms of part of Notre Dame's independence is the ability to stay a national school. And the Big Ten, you've got Los Angeles, you've got 2 schools out there, so you're West Coast, you've got Maryland and Rutgers on the East Coast. And when you look at the Big Ten, you go, Maryland, Rutgers, who cares about them? Well, the Big Ten network and, obviously in part the Big Ten, just by having those 2 schools, whether, how good they are is completely irrelevant, especially Rutgers, though, getting to have that New York market, because every cable subscriber out there is paying an extra $1.20 or something like that per month because of the Big Ten network, to have Big Ten network added to their subscription, and that was the first impact. Again, it's more revenue for the Big Ten. It's things that ACC network, Pac-12 network. There is no Big 12, but it's those kind of things that have really bolstered the Big Ten for the last few years that these other conferences haven't been able to solve.
And that's the problem with going to a conference, is you become regionalized. I mean, that's one of the biggest.
But the Big Ten isn't now because of the fact that
to a degree. Yeah, I get that. I still think joining the Big Ten just makes them part of the rest of them. And the Notre Dame's not going to be Notre Dame anymore if they join a conference. They become like everybody else. That's not who Notre Dame is.
I get what you're saying, but you're still thinking of the Big Ten 10 years ago.
I think about them in any conference. They become just one of many.
You're thinking about the Big Ten 6 days ago for that.
Well, no, I'm talking about any conference.
The LA schools,
any conference, period. They join a conference, they become one of many. They're not one of one anymore. They're one of many.
Sure.
So, yes, their footprint is bigger, I guess, in the Big Ten, but the SEC is going to keep growing too. I guarantee they'll pick up a couple teams on the West Coast. They'll pick up some teams on the East Coast. You're going to have 2 conferences. They're going to be coast to coast when it's all said and done.
Yeah. So the question is, what should Notre Dame do now? And that's the question that we asked. 2% said join the ACC full time. I don't blame that 2% for only being 2%. 8% said form a new alliance. 38% said stay independent. 51% join the Big Ten. And now we assume a majority of those who voted are Notre Dame fans because,
I would think so.
Notre Dame show and, those are the kind of people who follow us on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. My preference, stay independent as long as possible.
Right.
And I think that they still can for at least a few more years, and they do have a lot of leverage. But, we're going to lay out a lot of different factors here in a little bit. But I think the odds that independence is sustainable in the long term It is shrinking right now. It's not impossible. There's still kind of a course for that to happen, but there's a lot of other things working against it. But at the same time, they definitely have short-term leverage right now in what exactly does happen for their long-term future.
Somebody did ask a question. How many people voted in the poll? I believe it was over 700, right?
Yeah, it got up to over 700 by the time it was all
So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. My preference, I voted to stay independent. That was one of my vote. That was my only vote, was to stay independent, because I think they do have a lot of leverage staying independent at the moment. The kicker is going to be access to the college football playoff.
Yes.
Period. That's the kicker. And right now, Notre Dame has an equal seat at the table as the conference commissioners as of right now. And I believe that deal goes through 26, right? So that's where they're at the moment, okay? I think, and the better Notre Dame gets, right? We just got done having a show earlier today talking about recruiting. Notre Dame has the number 1 recruiting class in 23 and 24 at the moment. Pretty much no matter what happens, Notre Dame is going to be a top 3 class in 23, and 24 classes looking pretty darn good. If that can translate onto the playing field, moving forward, they start winning games, they start winning a national championship, etc. They've got tons of leverage, and they'll use it, right? And the other key here is Notre Dame is not as dependent on money from the TV deals as other schools to pay their bills. I do think that's a big piece of it.
Not as dependent, but they're also, talking about, well, the athletic department, has been struggling, lately, and all this different stuff.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
The 2 biggest things Notre Dame has to have to remain independent. Well, and I get what you're saying. It's the old argument. Well, they've got money, because you're talking about the endowment and all that stuff. Well, it's one thing to have money, but it's another thing for the athletic department to actually have access to it, because
sure. And the endowment has nothing to do.
The money goes to a lot of other.
No, the endowment has nothing to do with athletics. They're not
right.
tapping into that money.
Right.
But you and I are both at games on Saturdays at Notre Dame. They are literally using leaf blowers and rakes to rake in the money on the weekends.
Right.
There's plenty of money.
3 main things Notre Dame, you touched on one of them. 3 main things they need to stay independent. 1 is access to the college football playoff.
Absolutely.
2 is a TV contract, a TV partner. They currently have that with NBC. Now, they're making a lot less than some of these other contracts.
No doubt.
I'm going to run through all those financials here in a minute and compare. Third thing, and this is, to me, it's a distant third, because if you have the first 2, but the third thing is a conference for the Olympic sports to play in. And, it's like,
sure,
that'll kind of figure itself out. I think that there will always be a place with that, for that. But the 2 main things you need: access to the playoff and a TV contract. And so let's just start with the TV contract and how it compares to the other conferences, and kind of how they all impact each other. You want to start there? Are you good with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So Notre Dame makes about $15 million a year on the NBC deal. That runs through 2025. They get another $10 million a year from the ACC as part of that arrangement with the ACC. So that's $25 million a year in total they get from their 2 TV contracts right now. Now, the Big Ten is still negotiating their new TV contract, and it's like, that is going up all the time. When you add Market 2 and USC and UCLA,
sure,
and you've already got New York and you've got Chicago. So they've got the 3 biggest markets in the country right now. And now you've got, again, your footprint stretches from coast to coast. It's expected to pay $1 billion annually. It would be the first ever TV contract to pay a conference $1 billion a year. And so that's going to mean an average payout per school of somewhere between 80 and even maybe north of $100 million per year, depending on who they end up with and all that. And again, it's like you add the LA market to that, and that only pushes it up even higher. So you're talking about, again, for the Big Ten, between 80 and $100 million per school per year. Whereas Notre Dame is at $25 million total right now. Pac-12 grant of rights TV contract expires after the 2023-24 school year. That averages around a $44 million payout. So that's not bad. Big 12, they average around $41 million per year, the payout per school. ACC, the ACC, they signed a 20-year TV contract with ESPN that goes through 2036. John Swofford signed the deal. Jim Phillips got stuck with it. Total payout per team, $32 million a year. Now, it's called a grant of rights, and it works like this. If
this is the interesting part, by the way.
So this I think helps Notre Dame
big time
to an extent, right? Because for an ACC school to get out of the ACC, like if Clemson or Florida State wanted to leave the ACC,
great example.
Here's what has to happen, because those are Clemson is obviously at the one at the top of the list. Florida State's right after. It's starting to rain. I'm hearing like stuff beat up against my window right now. But so if a school wants to leave the ACC, it would have to pay $26 million, the average annual cost of the media deal, times the number of years remaining on the TV contract. So, for example, let's say Clemson wants to leave the ACC in 2 years. And at that point, there would still be 13 years left on the deal. So 13 times 26, Clemson would have to pay $338 million to go to the SEC, but wherever, Big 10, Big 12, wherever.
To leave the ACC.
To get out of the ACC.
Right.
And that's in 13 years. Obviously you wait a few more years. If there's 10 years left, that's still $260 million. A
lot of money.
Yeah. So unless there are lawsuits that that work their way around this, and again, it's like it hasn't worked itself through. There's a lot that an ACC school is going to have to do to get out of that contract. I think again, that helps Notre Dame, because that more or less kind of helps keep the ACC intact.
Keeps them stuck.
Whether you say the ACC is screwed or not, at least for right now, it is cost prohibitive for any team to try to get out of that, unless they can find themselves, legally a way around that contract, which, and like you listen to most people right now who have read this grant of rights, it doesn't seem like there are too many loopholes or ways out for any of these schools right now.
You'd have to sue and spend all kinds of money on lawyers. And
there's more discussion about the ACC needs to rework this so that Clemson, whoever, the top, it needs to be tiered basically. So Clemson is getting closer to 40 million, and, Wake Forest is the one sitting there maybe at 20 million or 15 million or whatever it happens to be. But again, I think that helps Notre Dame because it keeps the ACC intact because of how, cost prohibitive it is for any of those schools to try to get out of this contract. So it at least provides a third, right now we've got the Power 5 conferences. It at least, provides one more power conference in the mix with the Big 10 and the SEC. Even if they're not making the same money, those games are guaranteed to be on ESPN.
Right.
Through 2036.
And that's a long time between now and then, which gives Notre Dame a lot of time to win that elusive national championship. Now, I understand they haven't won one since 1988. I get that, but it gives them time. They're not. This is what people need to understand. Notre Dame's not pressured into making any kind of a decision right now. There's no pressure on Notre Dame. They can sit back and they can kind of still let this thing play out with plenty of time.
I'm just going to put this up. Irish Chi-Town says, based on what we were just talking about, unless the Big 10 or SEC pay the exit fees. I mean, I realize
pay $1 billion to get three schools over.
Literally, are they going to pay $300 million to get Clemson to join their conference? I just don't. I mean, that's basically 3 years worth of TV revenue per school. I don't. Best case scenario, they'll loan them the money. That's kind of what happened with Maryland when Maryland left the ACC to go to the Big 10. The Big 10 loaned Maryland money, but they didn't loan them $300 million plus dollars. Right. Again, that's why it's so cost prohibitive. It's prohibitive for everybody. It's prohibitive for the school and potentially, the new conferences that would want them to come in.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that whole thing right there benefits Notre Dame, period, because they don't have to find a new home for any of their Olympic sports at the moment, and they won't have to for the foreseeable future. they're not going to be pressured into moving around because the college football playoff and these two quote unquote super conferences, they're not locking out Clemson or Notre Dame for that matter because they're stuck where they're at. I mean, Clemson's stuck in the ACC, right? So they're not. Now, maybe they say, okay, after 26, they say, well, you have to be a conference champion in order to be in the college football playoff. Okay, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. But right now, Jack Swarbrick has an equal piece of the pie of the college football playoff voting. He's obviously not going to vote for that, right? So,
right.
He was on the committee that put together the 12-team playoff. And he, of course, has Notre Dame's best intentions at heart. So I trust Jack Swarbrick at this point. And so right now, everything that you just laid out about the ACC, it benefits Notre Dame. And I have a hard time finding a way that it doesn't.
Yeah. Now, from the Notre Dame perspective, again, like for them to get out of the ACC deal, which again, for them, it runs through 2036 as well. Notre Dame would have to pay like around $130 million. So it's more manageable. Like,
sure.
Again, like Chi-Town, and I wasn't just trying to shoot him down. I'm just saying $330 million. And that's, we're talking about if you wait 2 more years for Clemson, you're talking about what? You're talking about pushing $400 million to get Clemson out of that right now. It's a heck of a lot more cost effective for Notre Dame to potentially get out of it, at $130 million, if you waited the same 2 years for Notre Dame to try to get out of it, because that's basically like 1 year of Big Ten or SEC TV money. So there's a big,
and I don't think the Big Ten's going to be like, you know what, for 1 year, we'll just give you guys all this. We'll give you our money for 1 year and you go ahead and get them over and, we'll be okay. It's not going to happen.
But this is also the other side of it that you don't hear enough of these, like the doomsayers in regards to Notre Dame around the country. You don't hear them talking about this enough because this, the financials are obviously a big part of it. Whether it's, everyone wants to say, well, the ACC is about to collapse. Again, barring, a lot of, legal wrangling, which could take years and, cost, a lot of money, just to do that. I don't see it just falling apart. They're not in great shape just because of, again, John Swofford, he signed this 20-year deal. He said, well, I'll take the assurance that we're getting some money for the next 20 years. Well, so now the Big Ten's deal is coming up. Kevin Warren inherited a much better situation than Jim Phillips inherited because his TV deal is coming up. And all of a sudden, again, he's the hot kid at the dance that everyone wants to party with, or dance with or whatever, so it's a lot different for the Big Ten right now. And for Notre Dame, their NBC deal is expiring after 2025. So you've got 4 more years for Notre Dame on the NBC deal. So there's a couple of different things with that. One, CBS is going to lose the SEC in a couple of years. So maybe Notre Dame gets some, the more bidders you have, the better leverage you have. And Fox could also.
Yep. I think there's going to be a 3-way.
You could have a 3-way bidding war. For, so again, you're talking about how sustainable is independence in the long term. And the fact that Notre Dame could have a 3-way bidding war between NBC, Fox, and CBS only helps them when it comes to, again, being able to keep a TV contract because that's part of the independence. They've got to have a national TV partner to keep these home games on TV. You get that and you get a bidding war, and now Notre Dame's really in business. And again, that contract's coming up in 3 years. So I think that all these TV networks are going to start rubbing their hands together, and they're like, they want to get them some Notre Dame because Notre Dame can say what you want.
They bring eyeballs to the TV,
ratings,
man.
Baby. Ratings. They had, I think it was 16 games over the last 4 years that had 3 million plus viewers for those games. And, it's like schools like Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. Those are the ones in front of them, so they're right in there. They're right in there.
And there's going to be,
they're attractive.
There's going to be a bidding war for Notre Dame. That's just a fact. Now, things can obviously change in the next 3 years when you would be putting that contract up, for renewal. The landscape we know can change in a matter of days. There's no doubt about that. But I just feel like Notre Dame has the leverage right now, and they will continue to have the leverage. Notre Dame doesn't need to make $100 million a year in the TV deal in order for them to be sustainable. They don't need that. Okay. But people need to understand it's not just about the dollars. Okay. It's about, like you said, it's about access to the playoff and a national championship. It's about a home for their Olympic sports. And then it's about money. Money isn't the number one thing like it is for other schools. There's a lot of schools out there, UCLA being one of them, where the TV deal pays for everything. That's what's paying the bills for UCLA, as an example. That's not the case with Notre Dame. They don't need the giant TV deal to keep the doors open. Okay? $50 million, they're going to be plenty happy with that because that's what they make now.
Right. But again, like, here's my only question. You get a bidding war, especially with three major, the three of the networks, then you're in great shape. NBC, Fox, CBS, potentially. Because again, CBS is losing the SEC in a couple of years. But my only question is, does Notre Dame's current scheduling model, playing Marshall, UNLV, those kind of schools, a MAC school every year, is that attractive enough, for one of these networks to pay out, because you're going to get those schools plus your arrangement with the ACC, you're going to get USC or Stanford every year. You're going to get Navy every other year. Is that attractive enough? Because when they play the Ohio States and the Clemsons, on ESPN on the road, those are big games.
Sure.
Those are going to draw big eyeballs. But do these other opponents make them attractive enough that someone's going to shell out that kind of money? How confident are you that that schedule is going to get them that closer to that $50 million or whatever we've been talking about?
Well, look, every school has the directional schools and cupcakes that are part of their home schedule. Every school has that.
No, that's
true.
That's
not changing anytime soon.
But the benefit, because I don't want to cut you off, but I'll just go. If you were comparing it to, say, joining the Big Ten, where you basically would go back to a 1990s schedule where you've got Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, all these different.
But they're still going to have they're still going to have the MAC school on there. They're still going to have.
Oh, I know, but you're also going
whatever.
to Michigan State, and Purdue. I think are still more attractive, for example, than North Carolina State, Wake Forest.
I think that's up for debate. I don't. Is Notre Dame Purdue really a national draw?
I know it is from a fan standpoint. Like, if you ask the fans, they definitely like to see that.
That's a national. Purdue is a national draw. I think it's a local draw.
Well, okay, Purdue. Like, take that off. Michigan. Okay. Let's say
Michigan State. I think that's a local draw too. I don't think that's a national draw.
I think
maybe it will
TV
be.
Draw.
Maybe
it could
TV
be. Draw.
Maybe it could be eventually. Michigan, national draw. Granted.
For sure.
Ohio State, national draw, no doubt about it. But, Notre Dame's got Clemson on the schedule. They've got Ohio State on the schedule. They've got Alabama coming up on the schedule. Like, they've got some big ticket games that are going to be big time for Notre Dame. But I see where you're coming from. I just think that it's those are bigger games regionally, which is my number one reason for not being in a conference is you get regionalized. But I see what you're saying, and I think whoever they team up with on the TV side, right, they're going to have somewhat of a say when it comes to scheduling, right? Within reason. You're not going to get a marquee game every week. That's never going to happen, right? Yeah. But they're going to have a say. I mean, look, NBC had a say on which game went to Peacock last year. Notre Dame wanted to put a bigger game on Peacock, and NBC was like, oh, let's put the Toledo game on Peacock or whatever game it was. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there is some give and take there too.
But again, are other TV networks going to be eager to say, well, okay, we've got a throwaway game that we need to put on our streaming service instead of actual, CBS or Fox or whatever it happens to be.
Well,
someone was asking, just real quick,
yeah.
Someone in the chat was and I can't find it now because we're getting a lot of activity in the live chat, but was asking how much Notre Dame gets from the road games. That's part of this ACC contract. That's roughly like $10 million. Now that they get like some extra, when you're talking about Fox and stuff like that, when some of these get, some of the games end up on Fox with the road games and those different kind of things. But, really, we're talking about probably, I would have to guess, 30 to 35 million in total from all of those, because we're talking about 15 for NBC, 10 million a year for the ACC, and then,
right,
some extra kick it. So you think 50 million bucks is a good number, even based on what everyone else is potentially making out there?
From
you think like Notre Dame gets 50 million bucks a year from their
contract.
Total from their
contract, and
so
then
you
whatever.
think it could go up from 15 to 50
just
because you get a bidding war
I
going on.
definitely do.
Someone's going to pay that kind of money.
Because I think there's going to be like before it was NBC and nobody. Like nobody was bidding against them. It was just NBC. I don't think there was any legitimate bidding wars for that contract. I think that changes this time around, especially with CBS losing it, and I think Fox would love to have Notre Dame. I think that there's going to be a bidding war. I do. So I think 50 from their deal, and then whatever the ACC gives them on top of it, I think that they would be very happy with that. I do.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the TV contract part of it. Because again, as we've said, got to have the two main things. You got to have access to the college football playoff, and you got to have a TV contract. Because if you don't have a TV contract, you don't have a place to put your home games. And they've had that for 3 decades now with NBC. So that's going to be really interesting to see where that goes.
And I would think that those negotiations are going to start relatively soon.
And if they're not even already going on. And, because again, the number is still going to be significant. It's going to be about half of what like SEC and Big Ten schools are getting if it is 50 million bucks. But at the same time, you have to factor in how much Notre Dame values its independence. And and again, like what you've said, they don't have the same kind of athletic departments, and, they don't run things the same way as a lot of these other schools do. So I think that the value of independence, being able to play Shamrock Series games, being able to do all these different things, that factors in there as well. That helps offset some of those millions of dollars that you're not going to be getting that those other schools will have.
Agreed.
Okay, so as to the college football playoff and the access to the playoff, the current playoff arrangement runs through 2025 as well, which is basically the same time Notre Dame's TV contract expires. So that in itself, kind of maybe it gives them sort of a short-term, kind of target, I guess, because Brian Driscoll and I were talking a little bit ago, and we're kind of hearing some things that, this is looking like maybe Notre Dame, might just decide to weigh things for a little bit longer. They don't feel like they're, rushed into anything right now, which I think we can all agree is a good thing, unless you're not, Notre Dame.
Yeah, right.
That's another story altogether. But, again, they still have some leverage, because, again, there's been talk about schools like Clemson, Florida State leaving the ACC for the SEC. But when you look at the prohibitive nature of that contract with the ACC, that helps Notre Dame, as we talked about. It helps essentially keep the ACC together because, of what it would cost for those schools to get out. But as much as anything, the college football play is a TV show, and it relies on the conference commissioners working together to determine what the format is going to be. And the Big Ten and the SEC, like when we talk about leverage and it comes to running these meetings for negotiating how this next, arrangement is going to go, those two conferences right now drive everything. Like if they wanted, they could essentially say they're going to do their own thing, hold their own playoff, and everybody else, you can just go do what you want to do. That would obviously impact Notre Dame. They don't have to include the other conferences, and that's kind of a big potential wrench because, what probably pushed us to where we are right now is, with USC and UCLA heading to the Big Ten. Remember a year ago when this 12-team proposal came out, Jack Swerbrick was a part of it. And, he and Greg Sankey in the SEC, were two driving forces in this whole proposal. But, we get this proposal to go to 12 teams. ACC and the Pac-12 wouldn't agree to it.
Right.
And there had to be unanimous approval for this to change before this current TV contract runs out. Pac-12 didn't agree to it because they wanted to guarantee that the Power 5 champions were all going to get a spot, get automatic college football playoff bids. And so, even though this 12-team proposal said, well, the top 6 conference champions would get in, that wasn't a guarantee enough for the Pac-12. They were worried they might be the 7th or 8th best conference champion. They said, no, we want to guarantee that as a Power 5,
right,
our school is going to get in. And so, I think that's part of what drove the Big Ten to make this move, and what drove USC and UCLA to make this move. And, so again, I guess the bottom line is there's still a lot of uncertainty with what exactly is going to happen to the college football playoff now,
right.
because of the fact that, if you want to call them two super conferences, that's what you've got. They're the teams, or they're the conferences with the most power right now. The Big Ten and the SEC, they're going to have a lot of say in what happens, in terms of a playoff going forward.
Absolutely. And that, the only thing that is at this point is going to prevent Notre Dame from having access to the college football playoff is if the SEC and the Big Ten get so powerful that they can break away and say, look, we're going to do our own thing. We're not going to be a part of your playoff anymore. We're going to do our own playoff. And you have to be either with us or you're against us. And then you're pitting the NCAA essentially, well, not the NCAA, but the remaining, depending on how it works out, right? 75 teams versus the 40 teams-ish that are in the Big Ten and the SEC. What does that look like? You know what I mean? So that's really what it comes down to. Until that happens, Notre Dame's going to have access to the playoff. And you just have to hope, if you're a Notre Dame fan, if you're a college football fan, frankly, you have to hope that the Big Ten and the SEC don't get enough power to break off and force the hand of everybody else in college football. Right. They're trying to do that. I think that's maybe the end goal, but as of right now, they're ways away from
if one of them gets Notre Dame, they absolutely, can do
there you go.
Want. But I think Notre Dame still being essentially a free agent, if that's what you want to call it, that's Notre Dame is still a game changer in that they can still impact how those decisions are made. And I do think the fact that Jack Swerbick and Greg Sankey have a really good relationship at least kind of helps things along those lines, again, for the short term right now.
Yes.
Because one of the questions is, how long does Notre Dame has leverage now? How long do they keep that leverage?
Right. And I think, everybody's like, well, if they don't go to the Big Ten right now when they have the opportunity, they're never going to be able to go. I call BS on that, because any conference will get on both knees and beg Notre Dame to come to them if Notre Dame is ever shopping to be in a conference, period. I don't ever believe that will not be the case. So if Notre Dame's hand is forced because they say the college football playoff, like I said, if that scenario occurs and Notre Dame has to enter one of the conferences, they are both going to take Notre Dame with open arms. I have a hard time believing that wouldn't be the case.
So what it seems like, based on everything you're saying, we agree on what Notre Dame should do. You're in the Notre Dame should stay independent as long as possible.
Yes,
right.
100%. 100%. Do not give up the leverage. Do not give up the power that you currently have. I think that would be a mistake. I really do.
Craig Sebring says, I still say ACC. So let's talk about the ACC. Do you consider that, Vince, a viable option for Notre Dame to go full-fledged into the ACC? Like, is that more attractive than either independence or the Big Ten?
I do not see the ACC being a viable option for Notre Dame football-wise. It's not a strong enough conference right now. And if Notre Dame was considering joining a conference, I don't think ACC, I think they're third place. I think they're the third option for Notre Dame if they were looking for a conference for football. It's a great conference for the other sports. Things are going really well in that regard. I think that if you asked all the head coaches at Notre Dame, they would say that they're very happy in the ACC, except for the hockey coach because he's in the Big Ten. But everybody else would say that they're happy with their affiliation with the ACC. But from a scheduling standpoint with Notre Dame, it's hard enough right now with the 5 games that they have to play against ACC opponents to continue with their strength of schedule based on who they get from the ACC. It hurts them, to be honest with you. I think it hurts them more than it helps them. So they have to do it in order to keep their other sports happy, and I understand that. But if they went full-fledged and now you're talking about, I don't know, a 9-game ACC schedule, I just think that doesn't do Notre Dame any favors at all.
And part of the reason is we still don't know what like we keep talking about, they have to have a path to the college football playoff. We don't know exactly, like right now we know what that path is going to look like. Through 2025, we know what it's going to look like. But there's going to be a new contract after 2025. And that's with every, with all this shifting and everything else that's happened. Again, that's the uncertainty right now. And that's where the conversations are going to have to take place. Because again, like a week ago, all they had to figure out was, okay, in terms of the college football playoff, we're sticking with a 4-team format through 2025 because Pac-12, to be fair, the Big Ten didn't want to agree to it. The ACC didn't want to agree to it either. But so through 2025, they've got to stick because they had to have unanimous approval from all the conference commissioners to change anything before the current contract ends. But once that contract ends, all they have to have is a majority. But again, if the Big Ten and the SEC, because they're the two conferences, with the most power brokers, basically, if those two conferences decide we're done with the rest of you, we're just going to go do our own thing over here, then maybe technically Notre Dame still has a path to a college football playoff, but it's essentially going to be Big Ten, SEC, or the varsity playoff. And then everybody else is playing for the JV championship on the other side.
Exactly. I completely agree with that, And the funny part to me in this whole thing, in this whole scenario, Notre Dame wanted to be a member of the Big Ten back in the day. Like they wanted to be a member. The Big Ten was like, nope, we don't want you. Stay away. That was led by Michigan. We don't want you. We don't want you. We don't want you. And it was multiple times Notre Dame tried to get into the Big Ten, and they didn't want them. And now all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, they got to go to the Big Ten. Notre Dame's doing pretty good on their own. I think they're good at the moment. You know what I mean? I think that's the funniest part about this whole thing to me is this. If Notre Dame was accepted into the Big Ten way back when, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But also, Notre Dame wouldn't be Notre Dame that we know it either. So there's that.
It's very true. That's very true. And I mean, again, like going back to the schedule they're playing right now, it is very conducive to them being in the mix for a college football playoff berth every year. But again, not knowing what the college football playoff format or even who is going to be involved with it in what does that come out to? 4 years, 5 years, 5 seasons down the road. That's what we don't know right now. And I agree with what you were saying about the ACC. I just don't think it makes sense at all because, I mean, just as, again, like the schedule might be better for them, but the ACC could end up being left out of this whole thing. But, again, going back to what we were talking about for the short term now anyway, that plays in Notre Dame's favor. The fact that the ACC is sort of held together by financial constraints and all that different kind of stuff. But I just, like when you look long-term and you're going to compare it, like if Notre Dame is going to give up its independence and it's only going to get around $40 million a year in TV revenue from an ACC affiliation versus $100 million plus from either the Big Ten or the SEC, I don't think there's much of a decision there. Do you? You can whether you say money is the driving factor or not. Like if you're going to give up your independence,
if you're going to give up your independence, you go with the biggest payday.
Independence either way, it doesn't make sense to take half as much money.
Right? No, if you're giving up your independence, you go for the biggest payday because I agree with you. 5 years ago, the ACC was the best fit for Notre Dame as far as academics and and regionality and all the different things that everybody talks about, what were so important to conferences before. You can throw all that out the window right now with the Big Ten going to get UCLA and USC, and frankly, with the Big Ten going and getting Rutgers and Maryland and all that. Regionality doesn't matter anymore. Academic fit, I don't think matters anymore. Nobody cares about any of that anymore. And it's going to be hard for guys like you and me and Brian and all the guys that are over the age of 25 to understand that that's not the conferences we're dealing with anymore.
Yeah.
Those things don't matter anymore. And it's sad. I don't like it, but that's where we sit right now. It's just a name. The conferences are now just a name. The other stuff, it doesn't matter. And so if Notre Dame is going to join a conference, then I am all for taking the biggest payday they can find.
Yeah, I had the tweet last week about, I think it was one of the national writers tweeted something about Notre Dame has leverage right now, but, Big Ten, might be a good fit. Or, I can't remember exactly what their tweet was. And I said, yeah, that's what Penn State thought about 30 years ago. And, some people, well, Joe Paterno thought this and, whoever thought that. Well, for one thing, what the football coach thinks and what the president of the school and the athletic director think, mostly the president of the school, because they're the ones who ultimately are going to make these decisions. Sure. Those are two completely separate things most of the time. So whether Joe Paterno wanted to join the Big Ten is completely irrelevant. But I think you can argue that Penn State, even they weren't probably as national a brand as Notre Dame back then, they were still they were independent. They were still a national brand back then.
Absolutely.
And they are not now. They are a regional brand.
Absolutely.
And it is completely different. And again, Joe Paterno might have wanted to stay independent, but Joe, again, it's the school president who's going to make that call. And I do think that Penn State had some leverage back then, but they ultimately decided that's what they wanted to do.
And I think that was their downfall as far as
they also didn't have a TV contract like Notre Dame has.
Right.
Again,
absolutely.
That's why so many of these schools over the years,
yes.
Remember, Miami was an independent once too. These
Florida State was an independent, I believe, when they were back being a powerhouse.
They've all fallen by the wayside because they don't have what Notre Dame has that is all, a big part of this, and that is that TV contract. Notre Dame has a national TV contract, and it's great that your games are on ESPN every week, but the amount of households that a game reaches, if it is on a broadcast network, NBC, CBS, ABC, or Fox, compared to a cable network, even one as big as ESPN, is almost it's so much bigger. You're talking about hundreds of millions of homes versus a few million on broadcast TV versus cable TV. And that is a huge difference. And that is why Notre Dame has been able to stay independent for as long as they have, because they have that TV contract, and those other former independents don't have that. And, look at BYU. They tried to give it a go, and they were never able to get the money out of it because they don't have that even close to the same kind of TV contract.
Right.
And they're joining the Big 12 now.
Yep, absolutely. And Notre Dame's going to be by themselves pretty much in the world of independence. And I think that that's a very interesting place to be. And they have power. And no matter what anybody says, they have power. And ND Nation says everyone has ESPN. They say, I don't. I don't have ESPN. I mean, look, not everybody has ESPN. I can guarantee you that. And
because we're in an age right now where cord cutting is the big thing. Not everyone. It is literally. Give me just a second here. I'm going to do a quick Google search.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you the difference between the households that have ESPN and the households that the major networks reach. Okay, hang on just a second. This is ESPN was in 76 million households at the end of Disney's fiscal 2021 year. So 76 million.
All right, writing it down.
Remember that number. And that's a year ago. It's probably less than that right now because of
with COVID and everything.
Cord cutting.
Yeah,
but again, I'm giving you a basic households that have NBC. 1 in 3 household. Okay, no, hold it. I know this is very
riveting right audio, now. But not look. You're going to make a really good point here in a second because anybody with a TV and a pair of rabbit ears has ESPN or has network TV. I mean,
right.
Bottom line, right? And how many people are in the United States, or how many households are in the United States of America? I almost get, and I'm not going to deal in exclusivities here, but I would say the vast majority of people in America have a TV in their house, at least one. Right?
Right.
So they all have NBC, every one of them. And somebody, Spanky wants to know how the heck was I watching the College World Series if I don't have ESPN? I have my ways, right? But I do not have it personally. So,
yeah, 329 million Americans.
Okay,
76 million households have ESPN. So if you have a TV,
153 million more households.
Yes. If you have a TV, you have access to broadcast television. That is the difference.
Yeah.
And that is part of the value of Notre Dame being on NBC. Like, as sports fans, of course we have ESPN. We have some kind of access.
I have access to it.
ESPN.
I just don't have it at my house.
We're going to find access to it. But there is just a huge difference between being on ESPN versus being on one of the 4 major broadcast networks. That's all there is to it.
Right.
Again, 329 million Americans.
Right. That's a big difference. I mean, bottom line, that's a big difference. You know? So, yeah, it's, again, Notre Dame has leverage. So, you know, people might be upset by that, and that's fine. They're allowed to be upset by that. That's okay. That's why Notre Dame is who they are. They're either loved or they're hated. People hate that they have as much power as they do, but they do. Bottom line.
Here we go. The number of TV households estimated is 122 million. So there's your, like I said, it took a couple more Google searches than I thought, but a quick Google search.
That seems actually low to me, but okay.
So, I think so as well, but
it's still 50 million more.
That's right. Know. All right, we got a super chat. Can't Notre Dame leverage 100 million plus total as independent, 60 million for home TV package and 10 million for road games with ESPN and Fox, balances out for networks. They get access to both crappy and elite Notre Dame games.
There's ways for Notre Dame to leverage their money. Let's put it that way. I absolutely could they get 60 million for, you know, their home deal with somebody, whether that be Fox or CBS or NBC. Yeah, they could. And then they're under contract with the ACC for the away for a cut of their money. Right now that's 10 million. So you just add 10 onto that. So that'd be 70 million right there. 60 plus 10 is 70. That's pretty darn good. You're within, you know, a pitching wedge of the big conferences at that point.
It depends on, you know, like he's talking about, could they? Yeah, sure, they could in theory leverage a total of $100 million, but the big X factor in all this is the potential bidding war that you would get between 3 networks. You know, how badly does NBC want to hold on to it? You know, versus CBS and Fox trying to get it into the mix because, you know, Fox wants to add to what it's doing. NBC wants to add to what it's doing, but it can't add if it doesn't keep Notre Dame to begin with. And CBS is going to be out of the SEC business here in a couple of years.
Away games
got 3 potential bidders for it.
Away games are tougher, though, because especially when you're talking about playing other conferences, they're in charge of their home games when it comes to the TV. Notre Dame is a visitor. You're not going to have – you're only going to have so much power, okay? Notre Dame's not going to have power over the TV rights to their games on the road.
Well, and that's why Notre Dame gets a cut of that, ACC's TV contract because of their arrangement. Now they
Right.
get a smaller cut, but they still get a cut.
They still get a cut. And
again, they're going to get something from, like from Fox or CBS if they're on those networks for those games, but obviously not nearly as much.
Travis Shuttlesworth says Big Ten is on Fox, which is a broadcast network. Yes, but not all of their games are on Fox. The vast majority of the Big Ten games are on the Big Ten network. They're not on Fox. The big game of the week is on Fox. There's one game a week in the entire Big Ten that is on network TV, right? Unless they're playing on the road against somebody else who happens to be on network TV like ABC or something like that. But there's one game.
And for example, Ohio State, yes, they're
on a lot more than other people.
Fox.
Yes,
but not every home game is on Fox. Like every Notre Dame home game is on NBC.
And look, we've talked
that about every other school in the country.
Right,
Notre Dame is the only that's why that contract means so much. And what leverages their independence is their ability to have that contract, because nobody else can say that. They might have a couple games on Fox, a couple on ESPN, a couple on ABC, but nobody else can say every home game, with the exception of maybe the game that ends up on Peacock, or there was NBC Sports Network once a year or whatever, but nobody else in the country can say all of our home games are going to be on a broadcast TV station, which gives them a much larger reach.
Yes, no question about it. And we've talked about, my preference, because my opinion means everything, is that Notre Dame and Fox come to some sort of an agreement, and Notre Dame has that 3:30 slot right after the big noon Big Ten game. They have their big game at noon. Notre Dame slides in at 3:30. Boom. I love that idea, frankly. But again, that just works out well because I like some of the guys at Fox better to broadcast Notre Dame's games and things like that. So there's a lot wrapped up into that. But the way that Fox does their thing right now, their big games at noon, which is brilliant, by the way, because there's no other big games at noon.
They created a new primetime window, even though it's at noon and it's early in the day.
And I love that,
People
frankly.
are watching. The ratings are great for the big noon kickoff.
Yes, I love that strategy, and so I like where their head's at. I want to be a part of that. Like, and
quite frankly, like people scoff at the notion of, are USC and UCLA going to be playing these 9 a.m. games? And if
they want to be on national television, they will.
It's a new TV window, and again, it's just like the NFL going to London to play 9 a.m. games. And I realize it stinks to have to roll out of bed. I lived on the West Coast for a year, a long time ago. And I actually, now I was young, so, I was 20, 21 years old. So, when I say this, I like the idea of rolling out of bed hungover and watching the NFL at 10 a.m. on Sunday.
Right.
That appealed to me. If I was going to be hungover, at least I could roll out of bed.
Yep.
And the games were going to be on at 10 a.m. I did not mind that one bit. Just like on New Year's Day, like the old New Year's Day, we would roll out of bed, and at 11 a.m., there was going to be a game on, and then by 11:30 there was going to be another game on, and by 1 o'clock there was going to be a third game on, and we could just watch, multiple games all day long. I loved it.
Absolutely, I'm all about
that. No matter what my intake was the night before.
I love it. I'm all about as much football as I can possibly stomach, and it works out well because the IB pregame show is going to be from 10 to noon. We roll right into kickoff at noon, and we just watch football the rest of the day. Like that. That's your game plan on Saturdays, folks.
That's right. That's right. And then, you just get that much more stuff done later in the day. When you actually need to.
Yeah.
We got another super chat. Craig Sebring says, then I say, fine, no conference, stay independent. Let's win a couple national championships and some major bowl games. And that's
that. Look, you want to talk about leverage? There it is right there.
Yeah.
Notre Dame will have the ultimate leverage if they can go and be a player on the national stage by winning a national championship. That will they're not excluding Notre Dame from any of these conversations if they're winning national championships over all of the other parties involved. Period. That's your leverage right there. Craig, I am 100% on board with you. Stay independent, go win a national title, and then they're not going to be able to ignore Notre Dame as a seat at the table.
Right. Well, I had a comment that I was just going to throw in there, but now I can't.
Well, the comments have been fast and furious today. It's been
Here's
great.
an interesting one from earlier from Drunk Vigo, who was really active earlier. Notre Dame needs to create its own super conference, bro. And
it's talking to you, bro.
All right, bro. This is one option.
Yeah.
That it was part of the Twitter poll that didn't get a whole lot of play, but this is something that's out there as well. Like I don't know exactly what it could look like because of, here's one thing that I would say, like if the ACC is really serious about Notre Dame, for example, then hey, ACC, since you've got this bad TV contract through 2036, how about you think of, blow up what you actually have right now? You keep Clemson, Florida State, Miami, maybe you keep North Carolina around. I'd keep Georgia Tech around just because you get the Atlanta TV market. I think that's worthwhile.
Sure.
But then, if Notre Dame is involved, then okay, well, now we go to the middle of the country and we get TCU and we get Baylor, and maybe even we think about SMU and Houston, because then you've got the two biggest TV markets in Texas, in the middle of the country, beyond Chicago, obviously, but the next two biggest in terms of the middle of the country. And then you go out to the West Coast, and now we're talking about Cal and Stanford, because even if we don't have the LA market, at least we've got the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose market there in Northern California. And then we go up farther north, and so now you're coast to coast, you get maybe Oregon and Washington involved as well. I mean, to me, there are crazier ideas. I think like that.
Look, I think that would be the ultimate power move by Notre Dame. Like, look, we're not joining a conference, we're starting one. Like that would be the ultimate power move by Notre Dame. And that would be the get your popcorn out and just watch everybody just lose their minds as Notre Dame plucks who they want from all over the country and just start your own conference. I number one, I think they could do it. It would be very interesting to see how that would go. In my opinion, you'd have to do it pretty much behind the scenes and then just announce it like mic drop style.
That's right.
Here's our 12-team conference, 16-team conference. Let's go. Like that would be the ultimate. You thought that USC, UCLA going to the Pac-12 or going to the Big Ten was like a major announcement. That would be the ultimate mic drop if Notre Dame started their own conference. You call it whatever you want, Conference USA, and then just boom,
I think
baby.
That one's taken.
I know.
That one's taken.
But you know what I'm saying? Just like, here it is.
Because like Michael says, I said for the ACC conference to give the conference to Notre Dame, and people said I'm crazy. That's called big business. And I mean, I don't disagree with that. It couldn't be seen publicly as, Notre Dame is running this thing, obviously. But Notre Dame would have heck of a lot of pull in making something like this happen if you were to go out and
they do that. They get all those different schools, and when they announce it, they're like, "Oh yeah, and by the way, we just got $1 billion, TV deal with X."
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And that's how it's done. That's how you do it. Yeah, I agree with Alan. Alan's saying it would take $1 billion plus. Yeah, where do you think these conferences are getting their money? From the TV deal. Notre Dame gets a TV deal together. They get all these teams in the conference. That's how it's done. I mean, it could. I'm not saying it could be easily done, but Notre Dame has the power to do it. Period.
Yeah. JWick 13 says it would be similar to how Texas basically ran the Big 12 for a while, and you're right about that. And so now I was when I started in college at the University of Kansas in 1991, it was still the Big 8.
Right.
By the time I finished college, it was the Big 12. And all these stupid Texas schools came along. And believe me, none of the existing schools liked how much sway Texas had in this whole thing. And the fact that they were bringing all these other Texas schools along with them, it backed them up. Well, look at where Texas A&M took off first. And then the fact that Nebraska and Colorado took off. There was a lot of dissatisfaction. Missouri took off. There was a lot of dissatisfaction with how much sway Texas had in the Big 12. And now, it basically, the conference started to erode, and you had all these defections, and now even Texas itself is leaving.
Right.
So, none of it was ever good enough for Texas.
Right. Exactly.
You couldn't have a Big 12 network because Texas had to have the Longhorn network.
Right.
So trust me, I know. You don't have to tell me about that.
But, if Notre Dame starts their own conference, they're going to have a heck of a lot to say. You can say that everybody's even at the table and all these other things, and that's what you sell if you're Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame's seat's going to be about 6 inches higher than everybody else's.
Very true. So, it's going to be interesting. Again, like to circle back to where we started, Vince, Notre Dame still has a lot of leverage in all this.
Oh, yes.
And Notre Dame, in the short term, I don't know how long this leverage lasts, I guess, but based on all these things that we talked about, Notre Dame has enough leverage. I don't think they feel like they've got to make a decision right now. They're going to explore, I think, whatever possibilities are out there, as many possibilities as they can.
Sure.
I think there's going to be a lot of talks all over the country,
Oh, yeah.
Like the Big 12 and the Pac-12 have to figure out how they're going to stay viable. There was a report today that the 2 Arizona schools in Colorado and Utah are talking to the Big 12 right now. So there's a lot of things, a lot of talks that are going on. Notre Dame has a ton of leverage.
Yes, they do.
And they just have to, again, it comes down to the 2 biggest factors, and that is access to the college football playoff. Again, we don't know what that's going to look like going forward after 2025. And along with that, a TV partner, that gives them that revenue. So, again, that's what led to all these other schools losing their independence, these former big players, on the independent scene. That's what led to them ultimately not being independents anymore. They didn't have the TV contract that Notre Dame has.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. So we'll see what happens. But I think here's what I will say. Join the message board if you haven't already, the Irish Breakdown message board, because there is some intel over there about conference affiliation as from a Notre Dame perspective from some sources that Brian put out. So I would suggest that you check that out. And then we'll give everybody about 24 hours if you're not a member of the message board, and then we'll talk about it on the show. But definitely get over there. It's worth your time. It's worth the $5 a month or whatever Brian charges for the message board. Believe me, because he has all the data and all the intel. So check that out as well.
We went for a while tonight. Had a lot of people with us on the YouTube stream. We appreciate you. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Before we sign off, though, Sean, you're Sean. Brian's the other guy. Before we sign off,
got a gnat flying around.
Our
face is left numb though.
That's good. Our father from Canada says I had to duck out for a bit, but I'm guessing we never got to the baseball search.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and touch on it.
Yeah.
There was so much going on with the football talk. Todd Interdonato, the Wofford coach, had the report on him over the weekend. He interviewed last week. So as of right now, it is the Wofford coach, Todd Interdonato. They've had, he's been there a lot long. It's the same conference that Link Jarrett was in at UNC Greensboro, Wofford. They're both in the Southern Conference. Had a lot of success. They have won, Wofford has, that conference the last 2 years. And I think it is, off the top of my head, it is something like 9 or 10 years running. They've been one of the top stolen base teams in the country. They led the nation in back-to-back years, stolen bases under Interdonato. So, they're very aggressive there. So he is, as of right now, the only external candidate that I can speak on that I have definitely heard has been involved in that process, the Wofford head coach. And then the 2 Irish assistants, Chuck Ristano, the pitching coach, and Rich Wallace, hitting coach / recruiting coordinator, are still in the room there as well. So that's kind of, it's early. Are you still with me? Am I still with you?
I can hear you now. There was a bit of silence there for a moment, but I got you now.
I think we're starting to break up. So that's what we have right now. Vince is better than Wooford. Okay, that's what D-Rock Irish says. I think we're pushing our limit with this. Yeah, based on that right now, and I don't mean this, as a shot at any of these guys, because again, I think that the two assistants are both, to me, I think they're good candidates because of the fact that that they were there with Link Jarrett. They essentially kind of have the secret sauce, the formula that Link Jarrett had that turned this into a nationally contending team. But the fact that like two assistants and the Wooford coach are the three, to me, like we talked over the last few weeks about, sort of putting resources into this program. To me, it kind of says that they really kind of have eyes on keeping that coach's salary in the pretty manageable range.
Right.
Because I have to think that there has probably been some interest, and here and there I've kind of heard that there is some interest, from maybe some bigger names. Bigger names cost more money.
I guess they do.
Yes,
they do.
Yeah. So, hey, I'll just remind you, like us on the YouTube stream, subscribe to us, follow us, comment, rate us on the podcast platforms. We really appreciate it, and it really helps out the channel. We'll hopefully have some more on the whole baseball coaching search and stuff like that, as the week goes on. I want to say like July 19th was around the time Link Jarrett was announced as head coach. We knew he was going to be head coach prior to that, but I wouldn't be in panic mode just because, it's been it's only been a week since he was officially named at Florida State, and it's still been less than 2 weeks, since the report came out that he was going there. So,
right.
You do want to make sure you're finding the right guy. Right.
Absolutely. You got to make this is a huge moment for Notre Dame baseball right now. And I think it's even bigger than when Paul left, because they weren't coming off the College World Series when Paul left. Right. They're coming off of a College World Series. There's a ton of momentum. There's a bunch of young guys in this program. You want to stop the bleeding of the transfer portal. You need to get somebody in here, and you need to make the right decision.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. Great stuff. We had a lot of stuff. We're going to continue. We'll keep on talking about this, what Notre Dame is going to do, and we'll try to go some different directions with it, because there's some other stuff we were going to try to get to today that we didn't even get to. So
yeah, I know.
We got all that coming up. Yep. All right, Vince. Appreciate you as always.
Yes, sir.
It's Tuesday, so I guess I won't talk to you on the show till next week.
Sad but true.
All right, I'll talk to you later. That's going to do it for us tonight on IB Nation Sports Talk.